is Classic FM.
Welcome, it's Tim Leoro from the roof of Classic FM Towers and talking to Daniel Hope. Daniel, thanks ever so much for joining us because I know you're ridiculously busy.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
It's not often I talk to someone who is about to beetle off and do a free concert in Liverpool. Why is it a free concert? Why are you not charging these people, first of all? What's behind all this?
Well, I think the idea is just to get the music out there, and the idea behind this album, Spheres, is the connection between the stars, the planets, music. And so we thought about where could one actually host concerts like this, and museums, planetaria were the kind of idea. And it doesn't really seem right to charge money in a museum. People are there, they're coming for the experience, they're coming to learn about things. And so I figured, why not? It's a great way of doing it.
Now, I know Liverpool, but I don't know the museum. Is it one of those where you're on your back looking upwards? Will it be like that? Or will this be I know there's an atrium in this building, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a fantastic museum, firstly, with an extraordinary collection of stuff. It's got one of the largest planetaria there. But where we're doing it, people won't actually have to lie this way and look. They can actually have the full-on view. But the museum itself is definitely worth a visit because it informs people in that way about everything they need to know. And for me, music and science is such an interesting mixture. I was never particularly good at science in school, but I was always fascinated by astronomy and by the night sky. And that's what made this album happen, and it's what making these concerts happen as well.
I wondered where you'd got the idea to go to Spheres. Is it sort of a rebirth of you of science and music, as it were?
Yes, it is. When I was about 10 years old, I met the astronomer Carl Sagan, who did this fantastic Cosmos series.
I remember.
And we got talking, and I kind of just, bombarded him with questions. At the age of 8, I had my first telescope, and I was looking up at the sky. And he told me about this idea of the music of the spheres, which is, an unusual, strange idea that Pythagoras dreamt up, that when planets move, they create some kind of sound. And composers and scientists and mathematicians and philosophers have been inspired by that for centuries. So the idea was to bring this all together, my hobby, my interest, and beautiful music by composers from today who speak our language.
Now, I know of the connection between, say, Bach and his numbers and things like that, but is all the music specifically chosen with that in mind? With that?
Yes, very much of it. Some actually was even written specifically for the album. So, for example, Gabriel Prokofiev, the grandson of the great Sergei Prokofiev, wrote a piece called Spheres. Alex Baranovsky, a piece called Musica Universalis, which is the Latin term for music of the spheres. I wanted their kind of take on what they imagined otherworldly music would sound like. And then I took a few other pieces that existed already, like Ave per Fratres, the piece Benedictus by Carl Jenkins, which he very kindly rearranged for me for this album, and also some of Einaudi's music, which does take you into a different world. And I put that all together. So it was a bit like a mosaic coming together.
I was going to ask how you chose because there are some almost Classic FM favourites on there, but they're very much rearranged, aren't they? They're new versions of the new interpretations.
Yes.
And is that something, would you not go to just a classic, modern classic? Would you always want to reinterpret?
Well, the idea also that I had with this album was to have the modern take on things. So, for example, you have this beautiful foray piece, the Cantique de Jean Racine, which you have in the arrangement by John Rutter. So you have, again, a modern day take on something like that. It was important for me to present established composers like Bach and lesser known Baroque composers, but through the eyes and ears of today's sound world. So that's why I got young arrangers working on them, for example. So it brings an old concept into today, and that's something that really fascinates me.
The one that was a real eye-opener for me was the Westhoff.
Yeah, amazing piece.
Didn't know it from Adam, and it was just, again, a haunting reinterpretation.
Yeah.
Was that recomposed?
That was rearranged by a young German arranger. Westhoff himself is an extraordinary character. He was the most famous violinist of his day. He was the first one to really write sonatas and partitas 30 years before Bach did. Bach knew him, admired him. He also became the King Louis XIV's personal violinist. Had to come out and compose battle pieces for His Majesty. And he was just way ahead of his time and had this kind of labyrinth-type composition called The Imitation. And I thought it would be great to put a modern take on that again.
What I liked about the album was the fact that you attack on two fronts, as it were. There's Bach on there, but the recompositions which might aim at two different age groups, shall we say, which is always really nice to keep it going, isn't it?
Also, the thing about a sphere, you know, it is recurring, and it's always coming back. And this question, you know, 400 years of music. We've gone through all these changes, and yet where are we now? And that's also a question I was trying to ask. You know, we have this big question out there: what's going to happen to melody in the next century? And many of these composers are returning to melody, and that's also an interesting thing I wanted to try and examine in the course of the album.
Are you a particular fan of minimalism? Because it strikes me that it's sort of concentrated on in this. It seems to be an area of modern music that's very, very acceptable, as it were, rather than the sort of, as some people might call it, the crash bang wallop down the toolbox down the stairs composers. Is that one that really interests you?
I love a lot of it, and there are a lot of composers like Philip Glass, Michael Nyman, also Max Richter, with whom I've worked now a lot, who have a really interesting take on minimalism, and they're very different composers. It's something that I think does speak to one, this kind of repetitiveness, which also takes you somewhere else. But again, the sort of spherical thing lends itself very well to minimalism, because again, the reoccurring themes that come back.
It strikes me we're still playing Recomposed, the Max Richter.
Yeah.
The last time we sort of came across your music there, it's not a standard path for a violinist, is it? Or is there not? I was wondering if there wasn't a standard path for a violinist these days.
I don't even know what a standard path is now. But no, you're right. That was a challenge for me, because you know the Vivaldi I've loved and played since I was a small boy. And so when somebody says, I want to recompose the piece you love, you're thinking, well, what's wrong with the original? And then I got talking to Max, and I, you know, found out, and I heard some of the things he was doing, and I just thought it was fantastic. The only problem is I played the original a few nights ago, and in the rehearsal actually in Spain, I lapsed back into Max's version, so I called him up afterwards.
I was wondering exactly that, if it must be very hard to keep the two in the repertoire.
You have to really think. It does your head in a little bit, because Max does it in such a clever way. He pulls, you know, here and there, he puts in an extra note, an extra phrase, so it's very subtle, and yet it can completely throw you. But on Spheres, I took a different piece of his, which is called Berlin by Overnight, which is a terrific, very short little kind of night flight through his hometown. And there I recomposed him. I added a bass part, which is not actually in the score, because I thought it would be nice to recompose a recomposer.
Wow! Oh, that's lovely. Can I ask? Go back to a name which is very familiar to our listeners, Lord Menuhin, Menuhin, who obviously you met from an early age.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say you're interested in the quite specific area of repertoire you're into? Is that something that might have rubbed off from him? So he was quite outward-looking, wasn't he, in his repertoire?
He was very, very outward-looking, and he's somebody that I think about almost every day. A huge inspiration to me, to many musicians, and somebody that really believed in opening your ears to any kind of music. You know, his legendary collaborations with Ravi Shankar or Stefan Grappelli are things also that I witnessed as a small boy. I was lucky enough to grow up in that environment, witnessing and being part of that. So it taught me from an early age that, you know, you can very much find connections in different musical worlds if you take it seriously and if you spend the time and you devote the time to making it work. And so yes, he remains a terrific inspiration to me.
And is it would you be working on new repertoire now? Is it something you're always thinking about? Where will the next project lie? Where will the next area of music lie for you?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I've just recorded I've recorded half of the new album. The second half I'll do probably in April, but that will come out next year, and that's going to be about Hollywood exile composers, the ones that all fled Europe and created the Hollywood sound. And there'll be some very exciting collaborations on that album as well. So I'm kind of in the middle of that, with new commissions as well. I've got to play the Boat Whistle Concerto for the first time, and all of the standard repertoire I do. So it's juggling.
Yeah. At the risk of I don't want to at all get into the historical repertoire, but is it nicer working with living composers almost? or is the recomposition the best of both worlds? You get to work with both, as it were.
I just love the direct contact with a living composer, because you can ask them what they think. You know, if I could only ask Beethoven or Mozart, would just be amazing, of course. We can't. So I do kind of thrive off that contact. But, you know, it's difficult. It depends on your mood. It depends on the time of day. You know, sometimes there's nothing greater than Bach or Schubert or Mozart. Other days it's great to start something new. So I'm always just on the lookout for things that inspire me.
Yeah. It's not long now. You'll be in Savannah again soon.
Yes, I will.
And that's quite traditional repertoire, isn't it? You're taking. Is it Brahms? Is there? And
I am, but it's also, one has to say, we have 100 concerts in 17 days in Savannah, and we have every type of music going on there. So I'm responsible for the classical.
That's right.
And so many of the programs are more traditional based, but they're also, bluegrass, fado, flamenco, everything. So it's the time of year that I also spend 17 days in one place, which doesn't happen that much. And I get to just kind of absorb all this music, and I get to meet these fantastic musicians and develop many, many ideas there, probably too many for my own good.
Is that a totally different discipline, curating that as well?
It is, but it's very, very interesting because you create programs, you bring people together, and you take yourself out of the equation. I play there a lot, but there are many times where I just sit back and listen and enjoy. And it's fantastic to see collaborations happen for the first time. That's the great thing about Savannah. It's now my 10th year, and every time we have one-time only things. So it may be the birth of something, it may not work, and it will never happen again, but it will have happened there. And that's very exciting.
I love the fact they called it your Savannahversary, your 10 years. I can't help but notice, while we've got you here, you have the Beast beside you.
I do, the machine.
Any chance we could have a look?
Yeah, sure.
Would you tell us about it? Because our listeners
Yes.
are absolutely probably fascinated in what you've got in there.
Absolutely, and this is quite a beast as well. It's a Guarneri del Gesu from 1742. It's called the ex-Lipinski. Lipinski was the greatest rival of Paganini, so much so that he went against him in duels in Italy, and he won. He was the only violinist to actually beat Paganini in duels, kind of X factor in sort of 19th century time, and it caused such a.
Please don't let me anywhere near it. I have the clumsy gene. Okay, I'll stay well.
It caused such a rift that they asked once Paganini who is the greatest violinist in the world, and he said, "I don't know who the greatest is, but the second greatest is Lipinski." Lipinski then went on to play with Schumann and Liszt. He played with Liszt on this violin, the Kreutzer Sonata of Beethoven. It's been through some extraordinary hands, and I'm very, very, very lucky to have it on loan. It's an absolute masterpiece.
It's just beautiful to look at, apart from anything else. Obviously, a beautiful sound, but
yeah.
Oh, it's lovely. As I say, I'm coming nowhere near it because my wife will be watching this, thinking, "Don't let him anywhere near it." Oh, it's gorgeous. I mean, I feel like I'm on Antiques Roadshow where they say, if you were to get it insured, do you need to have it insured for a ridiculous amount?
Yes, you do.
You do.
You do. It's extremely valuable, and these instruments have just exploded in value in the last sort of 30, 40 years. In fact, I've just completed making a film about the mysteries of the great violins. We've been filming all over the world. We were in London a couple of weeks ago speaking to Charles Beer, a great expert. But I also got to travel around the world and play on all of the great collections, the Library of Congress in Washington, the Met Museum. I played probably on about 50 of these instruments. And there are many, many Strads around, but there are not so many Guarneri del Gesus. It's a much smaller amount. He was not a famous maker in his day.
Right.
He died in poverty as opposed to Stradivarius, who was very successful even in his day. So his instruments now are even more expensive.
Wow.
It's quite frightening.
Well, I'm chuffed that you brought it with you, and Daniel, all the best with the concert today.
Thank you.
And with everything, in fact, and Savannah too.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thanks.